headlines. Americans promoted democratic way of life. Americans reopen and establish schools prohibiting religious subject. Thomas cites to the restback of teachers' insufficiency. University of the Philippines Foundation laid public school system during 1908. And for news online.
It's May 4, 2021, Tuesday. Good afternoon. I am Jernay Mabaylan and you are watching News Online. During the American regime, Americans promoted a democratic way of life. As a policies differences between the two main political parties in the United States focus on the speed which self-government should be extended and a date on which independence should be granted. In 1899, President William McKinley sent to the Philippines a 5-person fact-finding commission headed by Cornell University President Jacob G. Sherman. Sherman reported back that Filipinos wanted an ultimate independence. McKinley sent out the Second Philippine Commission in 1900 under William Howard's staff. By July 1901, it had established civil government.
In 1907, the Philippine Commission, which had been acting as both legislator and government general's cabinet, became the upper house of a bicameral body. The new 80-member Philippine Assembly is the first elective legislative body in Southeast Asia. When Governor General Francis B. Harrison appointed a Filipino majority to the commission in 1913, the American voice in the legislative process was further reduced. By 1925, there was a high priority of education in U.S. policy. In initial years of U.S. rule, Filipino teachers were trained so rapidly, where in 1927, the school population expanded 5-fold in a generation, and educational opportunity in the Philippines was greater than in any other colony in Asia.
As a consequence of this pedagogical explosion, doubled to nearly half in 1930s. By 1939, some 1/4 of the population could speak English, a larger proportion than for any of the native dialects. Perhaps more important as the new avenue of upward social mobility that education offered. Educational policy was the only successful American effort to establish a socio-cultural basis for political democracy. For News Online, Jernay Mabaylan. Americans reopen and establish school prohibiting religious subject. For almost half a century, the United States governed the Philippines as a colonial power. The United States pursued policies which is rightfully believed would promote the social and material well-being of the Filipinos. One such policy was the introduction of the American system of education. Jessamine Compuso for the news.
After the arrival in the Philippines, the American military forces to begin establish schools. They opened the first school in Corregidor when the island fell into their hands in May 1898. Soon after, they occupied Manila on August 13, 1898. They reopened 7 schools there, and these are the Philippine Normal School, 1901. University of the Philippines was established, 1908. Far Eastern University, 1933. Philippine Women University, 1919. University of Manila, 1914. National University, 1900. Philippine Normal School, 1901. These early educational efforts, however, began to meet difficulties when the Filipino-American War broke out on February 4, 1899. In March 1990, the Second Philippine Commission, which was the legislative body during the early decades of American rule, passed Act No. 74. This act provided the creation of the Department of Public Instruction, which would supervise and control all the schools that had already been established, and also the prohibition of the teaching of religious subjects in the public schools. This is Jessamy Composo for News Online.
Up next, homicides to the restback of teachers and sufficiency. UP's foundation laid public school system during 1908. When we return, this is the News Online.
Meron bang proteksyon laban sa higit sa 100 sakit? Oo, meron. The #1 alcohol, Green Cross. Proven na pumapatay ng mga bacteria at viruses na sanhi ng diarrhea, hepatitis A, trangkaso, at napakarami pang sakit. Stop 100 plus diseases with Green Cross alcohol. May one defense versus 100 plus diseases. Green Cross alcohol, una sa proteksyon.
Homicides to the restback of teachers and sufficiency. As the number of students doubled up, the number of soldiers torn into teachers was not sufficient. And there were only few Filipinos who know how to speak English. April Rose Luna for News Update.
The lack of adequate finances was just one of the several problems that confronted the American educational system in the Philippines.
During the early years after its conception, there was also the problem of the lack of teachers who could speak the English language. The adapted medium of instructions in the public schools, the number of American soldiers turned teachers was not sufficient, and there's only a few Filipino who knew English. To solve the problem, the colonial authorities decided to import American professional teachers. In 1901, the first batch of this group of teachers, numbering around 600, arrived in the Philippines by USS Tomas. Hence, their popular name Tomasite. They were immediately assigned to teach in the elementary and secondary schools. But aside from teaching school children, they were also made to train Filipino teachers.
And recognition for their good services. In the classroom, some of them were appointed to responsible position in the educational system, such as supervisors and division superintendents. This is April Rose Munga for News Online.
University of the Philippines Foundation laid public school system during 1908. As the American founded the University of the Philippines during 1908, public schools and even private schools has established school system. Maribeth Braga for News Update.
As finally established, the American public school system in the Philippines consisted of 3 levels: a 7-year elementary school, a 4-year high school, and a university.
Throughout the colonial regime, the school system expanded considerably, especially the elementary level. In 1906, there were only 3,342 elementary schools throughout the archipelago, with an enrollment of 365,530. In 1935, when the Filipino was virtually given self-government with the establishment of the Commonwealth government, the figures increased to 7,766 elementary schools with an enrollment of 1,173,587. This expansion of the public school system was due mainly
to the enthusiasm on the part of the Filipino parents to send their children to school. This is Maribeth Braga for Online News.
We talk facts. We deliver the truth. Your name, Mabaylan, and you are watching News Online.